We may be seated. Thank you so much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Guest of honor, Mr. Kayola Chimfwembe, representing the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Finance and National Planning, senior government officials present, ZIPA Interim Executive Director, representatives from UNU, WIDA, UNICEF, the private sector, members of the Fourth Estate, whom we call the press, all protocols observed. I welcome you this morning to this very important launch, where, of course, a report launch on the mid-year budget performance and socio-economic outcomes for the first half of the year. I'll be your moderator for today. My name is Paul Shingongo. I'm a journalist and communication specialist, but also a commentator on current affairs, currently working as an analyst with one of the private TV stations, Prime TV. Ladies and gentlemen, to kickstart the meeting, I ask that we all be upstanding as we sing the national anthem. The technical team will lead us in that. We may kindly be upstanding.
Tendency of Zambia, proud and free, land of wealth and joy in unity, victors in the struggle for the right. We want freedom's fight, oh, one, strong and free. Africa is our own motherland, fashioned with and blessed by those who blend. Let us all our people join as one, brothers under the sun, oh, one, strong and free. One land and one nation is our cry, dignity and peace in Zambia's sky, like a noble eagle in its flight. Zambia, praise to thee, oh, one, strong and free. Praise be to God, praise be, bless our great Zambia, Zambia, Zambia. Remain we stand under the flag of our land. Zambia, praise to thee, oh, one, strong and free.
We'll remain upstanding as we invite Mr. Patrick Sokoni, who will lead us in prayer.
Let us pray. Father, we thank you for this opportunity to gather in such a manner. How we pray that you alone be at the center of everything that we do, and you help us to deliberate in peace. In the mighty name of Jesus Christ we pray. Amen.
We may comfortably be seated. Thank you, Mr. Sokoni, for that prayer. It's coming from the Ministry of Finance and National Planning, where the guest of honor is coming from. Thank you, sir. I was noticing the lips of people in singing the national anthem. I was trying to see the Gen Zs, because we used to, we only knew the two stanzas, but now there was a directive that we have to go full throttle. And it has been a challenge with especially the younger ones, but I think they've adopted. I've seen some students in the audience. I was paying attention. I think we've acclimatized now. Ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time, we'll get straight into the program, and let me just run through. We should be able to have a program on our table. In case you do not have, you may indicate, and members from ZIPA will be able to assist you with the program on your table. We're going to have welcoming remarks from Mr. Zali Chikowa, who is the Interim Executive Director from ZIPA. Thereafter, we'll have a speech by the guest of honor. We'll also have a presentation from how climate-proof is social cash transfer in the advent of various interventions that government has been putting in place. We know how pivotal interventions like the social cash transfer has been. We'll have that from UNU wider, Pierre Rattenuber. We'll break for tea and photo. Afterwards, we'll have remarks from UNICEF and the real reason why we are here, which is the launch. Of course, before that, we'll have the media budget review, sustaining livelihoods through financial headwinds, and that will lead us to the report launch, the reason, the purpose, the motive for this meeting. We'll have closing remarks by the ZIPA Interim Executive Director. This meeting is supposed to end midday, and we'll endeavor to ensure that we follow through on time. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Mr. Zali Chikuba, Interim Executive Director from the Zambia Institute for Policy Analysis and Research, for his welcoming remarks. Round of applause for him as he makes his way. We can do better. We can do better, yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Master of Ceremonies. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, at least it's become warmer now. I think everything should be warm around here. Allow me to recognize the presence of the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Finance, represented by Mr. Kayula Chimfwembe, Assistant Director, Revenue Management. I also wish to recognize the presence of the representative of UNICEF, Mr. Tinkani Musonda, representatives from UNU wider, Ms. Pierre Rattenuber, that's the head of the South Mode project at UNU wider. We also wish to recognize the presence of all senior government officials present, development partners present, a representative from the private sector. Let me not forget to recognize the presence of the Vice Chairperson of the ZIPA board, Dr. Bonachita, who is amongst us and has always been there to support us in all our dissemination. A special recognition to you, sir. The private sector representatives present here, the media, ladies and gentlemen, and all protocols observed. It's quite a good morning, like I said, and it is a great honor and privilege for me to welcome you all to this critical joint dissemination event. And I am calling it joint dissemination event because there are 3 institutions that have tied knots to ensure that this event is done today. This includes ZIPAR, UNU wider, and UNICEF. Each one of these institutions has brought significant resource into this event. As well, it's a joint event because we are jointly disseminating 2 critical outputs. That is the media budget analysis, or the media budget review, as we like to call it, and the analysis of the social cash transfer in responding to climate shocks. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now established that ZIPA is the go-to place for reliable and timely evidence-based budget performance information in Zambia. The media budget review is crucial, as such a crucial activity in the fiscal calendar of Zambia. It provides an opportunity to pause, reflect and take stock of how the national budget has performed in the first half of the year. This is not merely an academic exercise in reporting numbers. No. In this activity, we assess how the economy is faring. We look at issues beyond just numbers. We gauge how well we are doing in addressing structural constraints which affect the efficiency of our revenue mobilization strategies, on one hand, and on the other hand, the efficiency of our public spending in impacting the livelihood of the Zambian people. We interrogate numbers, of course. We look at whether the fiscal policy remains aligned with national priorities and how the pressing challenges such as revenue mobilization and debt servicing, how much progress we are making in those areas, and finally the expenditure, how it is impacting the wider economy. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it is clear from the information that we have been gathering since the quarter turned, since the half of the year turned, we observe progress in our economy, with GDP having indicated to have grown by 4.5% at mid-year, inflation slowing down to 14.1% by June, and this is from the high of 15.2% in June the previous year. What has caused this change is mainly what we have noticed with the supplies of food, and also the decline in the prices of the food because of the increased supply, and the appreciation of the kwacha against major convertibles. These numbers have now changed, of course, from the time that we turned the half-year mark. We know that inflation now is around 13%, all indicating progress within the economy. These outcomes, though modest, make us optimistic about the resilience of Zambia's economy. On the fiscal side, government revenues showed encouraging resilience overall, even if some of the revenue categories have underperformed. Expenditure continues to remain an item under pressure. There are a lot of spending needs in our economy. We have seen compressed spending in some sectors and overruns in expenditure in terms of interest payments during the first half of the year. This contrast underscores the complexity of our fiscal environment. Overall, we are very happy that budget credibility has been restored. Ladies and gentlemen, the second component of our presentation today is on the results of Zambia's our micro simulation of the social cash transfer using the micro-ZAM mode. This is an analysis that has been performed not as an academic exercise, but something that is based on the data that is collected by our National Statistical Agency, ZAMStats. This is national statistics that we can all trust. The social cash transfer performance is being analyzed as a tool for responding to shocks such as drought and floods, whose frequency is undoubtedly increasing and significance high, severely affecting livelihoods across our country. Let's face it, these simulations are not abstracts, like I said. They are modeled after our national statistics, and therefore they can be trusted. They can be trusted to offer evidence-based pathways to strengthen Zambia's social protection system, ensuring that resources are channeled to the most vulnerable, and to make sure that our development journey is inclusive and resilient. In these same exercises, we have also discovered that most of the subsidies that we carried were welfare neutral. And therefore, channeling resources directly to the beneficiaries is about the best pathway to improving the livelihood of the vulnerable in the country. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the combination of the budget analysis, dissemination, and social protection modeling is intentional. During our dissemination of the 2025 budget analysis, we urged the government to not quickly discontinue with the enhanced social cash transfer program, because we had strong feeling that the effects, the weather effects, the weather variability was still a strong factor, and it still had some lags in its impact on the welfare of the people, such that removing that program early in the year would still plunge back those people that we were trying to shore up into poverty. And slowly we are realizing that weather variability is entrenching itself into the structural equation of our growth and development as a nation. And therefore, focusing on programs that support directly the poor is a critical effort in our desire to lift the livelihoods of the people in the country. So simulations such as this one, the micro-ZAM mode, provides insights into how different policy options and program designs can impact poverty, inequality, and household resilience. So together with the media budget analysis, the two create a comprehensive picture that is essential for informed policy decision making. We look at how the budget performed, and thereafter we look at how the various programs that we are funding in this budget go a little further to deal with the issues of poverty and inequality. I think this is quite a crucial combination. And going forward, this is the way we envisage to be doing things. As I conclude, allow me to express my gratitude to the partners that have stood with us in undertaking this exercise. UNICEF for their invaluable financial and technical support. UNU-WIDER as well have come in with both technical and financial support, which have made the media budget analysis and also the simulation of the social cash transfer program possible. I wish to extend my appreciation to all the personnel, our researchers and partners that have participated and contributed to making the budget analysis possible and the review of the social cash transfer. So on behalf of ZIPA, I warmly welcome you all to this dissemination event. And as I welcome you, I encourage you all to engage fully with the findings. Share your insights. We want to hear your thoughts. It's not just about ZIPA preaching. It's not a church, but It's a forum where we need to engage with the data, with the analysis that is coming out. Because only through such can we ensure that Zambia's fiscal and social policies deliver prosperity, equity, and resilience for all. Thank you, and I wish us all a fruitful engagement. May God bless you.
Round of applause once again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, Mr. Chikoba, for those remarks. He's mentioned quite a number of important things worth pondering on, also giving us statistics on where we are, inflation reducing, numbers needs to be interrogated indeed. I one time had an interview last month with Professor Lumumba, and he says statistics don't feed people. And maybe he needs to explain further that we begin from there, right? We need to interrogate those statistics and see whether they are reflecting also on the ground. Thank you so much. And I know that during the course of the conversations, we'll be able to react to some of these key issues that are being raised in the remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll move on in the program. We are going to have a speech from the guest of honor, the Permanent Secretary from the Ministry of Finance, being represented by Assistant Director, Mr. Kayola Chimfwembe. But my shoes, like you can see, are quite small to call upon the guest of honor. Allow me to call upon the Interim Executive Director from ZIPA to once again, please come through and call upon the guest of honor. Round of applause for the ED.
Thank you. The task is simple. Allow me to call upon the guest of honor, represented by Director Kayola Chimfwembe, to come and deliver the key note speech for this event. Director. A round of applause as the director comes through.
Good morning, everybody. I hope we are enjoying our meeting so far. As was mentioned, I'm representing the Permanent Secretary, who's not been able to be with us today because she's engaged with sector ministries looking at the 2026 budgets. She would have loved to be here. I'm sure for those of you who know her well, she's a consummate advocate of evidence-based interventions, such as the work being done by ZIPA and other research institutions. So she sends greetings to all of us here. The Interim Executive Director of the Zambia Institute for Policy Analysis and Research, Mr. Zali Chikuba, and your staff present here. The Resident Coordinator, United Nations in Zambia, the Resident Representative in Zambia of the United Nations, the International Children's Fund, UNICEF, the representatives of the Ministry of Community Development and Social Services present, other government officials present, distinguished guests, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor to stand before you today to launch the 2025 mid-year social sector budget analysis, together with the results of the micro-ZAMOD simulations on the social cash transfer program. These scenario-based insights, which will also be developed into policy briefs, complement the budget analysis by providing an evidence-based perspective to inform policy dialogue and strengthen decision-making. This launch comes at a pivotal moment as Zambia continues its journey towards the attainment of the Vision 2030 of becoming a prosperous middle-income country. The mid-year social sector budget review report is more than just a document. It serves as a mirror reflecting our country's performance so far this year, as well as the challenges and opportunities along the path to inclusive and sustainable development. It sets an important precedent for how far we can enhance sustainable and innovative financing in our upcoming national budgets amidst global policy shifts. The significance of this report is best understood within our current economic context. In 2024, our country grappled with rising prices that placed considerable strain on households. Encouragingly, the first half of 2025 has shown signs of relief. Inflation has eased as food and fuel prices declined. The consumer price index slowed to 14.1% in June 2025, down from 15.3% in May 2025. This is a welcome trend and the one that brings renewed optimism as we work towards medium-term inflation target band of 7 to 9% by 2028. Ladies and gentlemen, in a bid to protect the poor and vulnerable, the government continued funding the social cash transfer during the first half of 2025 alongside the drought response images social cash transfer. Complementing this is the recently introduced Cash for Work program, a flagship intervention that has benefited over 2,500,000 Zambians. This initiative is not only offering short-term employment and income to vulnerable households, but it is also empowering communities through productive infrastructure and economic resilience. It is envisioned that continued efforts will be pursued to develop a national framework of implementation to ensure efficiency. Further, the free education policy continues to help us address accessibility to quality and inclusive education. The health sector also shows improvements in the mortalities due to the government's unwavering commitment to ensure access to universal quality health care through infrastructure and recruitment of skilled health personnel. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2023-2024 drought undoubtedly exposed various vulnerabilities and welfare in the country, but it also brought us together as one from all sectors to ensure that livelihoods are improved. As such, the government is committed to sustaining the cash transfer value at 400 kwacha, and will also continue to review it so that it surpasses the poverty line for basic needs. While we continue to make these significant strides as a country, we must not forget the high national poverty and child poverty levels. These, coupled with the inescapable impact of climate change and global policy shifts, have the potential to erode the existing progress Zambia continues to make. Distinguished guests, it is for this reason that ZIPA, in partnership with the UN-WIDER and UNICEF, convened key stakeholders from across the country with the objective of strengthening preparedness, developing more effective shock response systems, and ensuring that social programs are better aligned with national development strategies. Building on this effort, the micro-ZAM mode activity was not only to create scenarios, but also to improve fiscal planning and reduce risks of over or underfunding and address weaknesses in targeting mechanisms that too often prevent assistance from reaching the intended beneficiaries. Such modeling of the key programs such as the social protection is key to policymakers to make informed, evidence-based decisions that directly impact livelihoods and well-being of the nation. As we look ahead to 2026 national budget, our priorities are clear: to enhance coordination, scale up high-impact community-based interventions, deepen investment in integrated data systems, and promote accountability at every level. In doing so, we will be better prepared for the future and will ensure that the future generations are protected. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, human development is the foundation of our national development process. No economy can grow without a healthy and productive nation. Without an educated society, without an empowerment of marginalized groups, and without overall citizen participation. Equally, no economy can grow if the policy makers are not accountable to the needs of our country. The mid-year social sector budget analysis and the results of the macro-ZAMO simulation are therefore more than analytical outputs. They are a call to action. They challenge us to confront the gaps that have been highlighted as we continue to plan for a prosperous future ahead. Let us take these insights from the findings in the reports and turn them into concrete actions that will uplift the livelihoods, strengthen resilience, and move Zambia closer to the vision of a prosperous, inclusive, and sustainable nation. Ladies and gentlemen, with these remarks, it is now my honor and privilege to officially open the dissemination launch. Thank you very much.
Another round of applause for our guest of honor, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, sir. Very informative details also there being shared with us. Key to the issues that are happening in the country, but also things that need our own reaction. Thank you so much. We're going to have a presentation just for us also to understand, like I said earlier, there are certain interventions that are there, like the social cash transfer and various interventions that government has been implementing, which of course have been yielding results. But also let's understand how climate proof is equally social cash transfer. Someone will be wondering, climate and social cash transfer, how is that connected? We'll be given the answers to that shortly. Help me welcome up here Raten Huber from UNU Wider, head of the South Mode project. That's the United Nations University World Institute for Development Economics Research. Round of applause for her as she comes. Earlier I was asking, how do you pronounce your name? She said, don't mention it. He said, no, it's very easy. So yeah, I can repeat it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Actually, you did really well on my last name. And it's actually a very funny name. If anyone speaks German, you can laugh about it. We always need a good laugh. So, welcome everybody. Good morning. It's my absolute pleasure being here today. My particularly thanks goes to our guest of honor, of course, Director Kayulia Chifembe, but also all other senior government officials who have taken time out of their busy days. We really appreciate that. I also, of course, want to thank Director Sali Chikuba. as the director of SIPA, you are the figurehead of actually a full organization that we've been working with so trustfully for so many years. Since I joined you in UWIDA in 2017, we've been working with you, and it's been really, we've been going from strength to strength, and I hope this is adding to this pearl string that we keep making together. Thank you. I also want to thank very much UNICEF, represented today here by Tinkani Msonda, for their presence and continued support of this line of work. We really appreciate that you bring us all together, because as was mentioned already a few times, it is not helpful to talk about either the budget or social protection in isolation. We need to see the full picture and pull it all together. I also want to thank the representatives of the private sector. Private sector of the economy is very important for any development to happen, and to have a conversation is just as important. Also, all other partners in media are very important for making sure we talk about what we do, we explain it well, and we are being asked what we do and why we do it. Finally, I think there's some university students also here, and to me, also hopefully some faculty. That's very important because as we create new evidence, we need to also make sure the new and young people are coming up and they keep us building better evidence for the future. So thank you everyone for having us here today. Now, the work I will present today stands on many, many shoulders. Quite a few of those shoulders are present in this room, but many more shoulders are not present in this room. So I will actually start with my co-authors. They are Anna Sazova from UniWIDA, Katrin Ghazi of Salisbury, and Adnan Shahir of University of Bologna. They've all worked in various roles in SouthMod, which is the larger project that I'm leading on. But most of all, this work relies on MicroSumMod. And MicroSumMod, as you know, is hosted as the Zambian version by SIPA. And it's the national team with different members who are here in the room, or previous members who might also be in the room with us today. But it's also many people in government who we have been working with continuously. To do and make such a model work, you need information from government, you need exchange with government. So we've had various meetings and trainings in the past and various applications. And such a model is only as good as we make it together. So again, a big thank you to everyone who has made this instrument what it is today. Now, this particular paper was, as mentioned, always motivated with a very policy mind, but at the same time, it's also a research paper that's available on our webpage. We have a shorter version as like a policy note also lying at the table at the entrance. And it's part of a bigger project that my colleague Rodrigo Oliveira has led on, which talks about social protection, social insurance in fragile settings. And there's a policy handbook that goes with it. So I highly recommend also to look at that. It has a lot of learnings from a lot of other studies in a very digestible format. So no fear, it's not 40 pages of tables and numbers and difficult figures. It's really distilling the main takeaways. Also, this work is inspired by a larger body of work that we've been doing at UniWIDA on tax benefit systems and crisis, where we look at several countries across the world to understand how are their systems responding to crisis. So with that, let me jump right into it. So obviously, as was mentioned, and I don't want to repeat too much here, but the rural households in Zambia are particularly vulnerable to drought, and as they depend on rain-fed agriculture. Now, a drought leads to sharp drops in agricultural income, but also household consumption and the various components of that, right? So the social cash transfer program provides protection, but actually many vulnerable households are not reached by it. So that's kind of where we start from, right? So our initial question and guiding question is, how well does the SCT perform if droughts hit? In a very simplified way, who is eligible for the SCT? That is screened through the household composition test and a living conditions test, right? Now, these eligibility criteria, they are oblivious to a drought, right? They are based on things that will not change immediately if there is a drought. Like the amount of children in a household, the assets in a household, it will not change immediately if a drought hits. So, and even if it were to change, you would need to go out immediately and go to each house and understand how it has changed. And that's why the SCT as such is kind of oblivious. It doesn't know there's a crisis happening and changing people's consumption, right? So, lots of numbers, but actually the main takeaway is pretty simple. This is like 20 years of meteorological data on rainfall for Zambia in the growing season. So it's all the little numbers at the bottom. And at the side here, you see the proportion of affected districts. And the yellow bars basically means how large the share of districts is that had an unusually large negative shock, meaning a drought. Unusually large is defined in statistical terms, but it's basically something that doesn't happen all the time. Now, unfortunately, we know in the most recent years it has happened in a row, right? So what we do in this paper, we basically take more or less a shock like 22. And we work with that to see what does it do with the SCT in place as we know it. So, basically take a shock like 22, that's step one. That's from weather data. Then we take the LCMS, the data that was mentioned before, and we basically reduce households who are in drought-affected regions, districts. We reduce their consumption of different types, but also the income from agriculture. Because we do know a drought will affect it will come through several channels to affect a household rate. And we calculate this based on other research that has actually looked how much households adjust their behavior if there's less rainfall happening. And we take this, of course, to microsummit, where we have already in the model eligibility to the SCT. We use the same data that I was just mentioning, and then we look at what the SCT does in its current form and how alternative scenarios of the SCT could look like. How could it be reformed? Now, in a very simple way, what you see here, the blue charts going down, so this is consumption, and we are seeing how climate shocks affects consumption, right? So you see it goes down, it's negative. So if you have a climate shock with the SCT in place, the current SCT, no policy reform, you do see that across the consumption, so the poorest people are on this side and the richer people sit on that side in terms of consumption, you do see it pushes it down for everybody, but the worst hit are those at the bottom. So you have poor people and they are even hit worse by such a shock. Now, we do this and we say, what happened if there wouldn't even be the SCT? And you see, these are the green little dots. They go even down further. So SCT is doing its job. And it's doing already quite a lot, as you can see. Like for the lowest ones, taking about like a third away from the shock to consumption. Now, if you look at poverty, so that's the left part of this slide, the right part, you have the poverty gap. And what you see here again is the same, but now for the poverty numbers, you see with this climate shock that I talked about, that's the blue bar, and that means we have the SCT as it is right now, and the green dot is again if you wouldn't have SCT. And then you can see, first for female-headed and male-headed, urban, rural, and total. You don't see that there's a huge difference between the dot and the bar, but what you do see for the female-headed households, there's a bigger difference. Why? Because the SCT, of course, has a particular focus on female-headed households. And you do see there, it works particularly well. And also in the poverty gap, you also do see it does something in terms of the last bar on the far right for the total population. It does play out. Now, when we were thinking about this, we were thinking it from two perspectives. One perspective is, in a way, a theoretical exercise. What could we theoretically reach if we had perfect information? Now, in reality, this doesn't happen. We do know that, right? We never have perfect information. But what it helps us do, having a scenario with perfect information, we can just see how far could we get if we were perfect with a certain envelope of money. How much would it take, right? So that's what we now call kind of the automatic response. If we had the perfect information on how consumption would be reduced in a shock, and we could exactly know who these households are, what happens if we keep all the existing beneficiaries, but those in the drought-affected districts, we actually give them double the amount. And if they go below this certain threshold of consumption. So this is kind of just the space of possibilities. You can think of it like that. Now, the second and the third one, we tried to stick closer to the current policy and also a bit more like what could be potentially implementable. So there is in the paper a lot more scenarios. I'm concentrating here on the most important ones for the most important takeaways. So we tried around with the living conditions test, and it didn't do much. Like we were not getting much better in getting to the households in need. Then we tried the household composition test, and we were like, what if we take that away in the drought-affected regions? So that's what we do in the number 2. In all other, the non-affected areas, we just keep the SCT as is, right? And then in the 3, we said we do the same. In the drought-affected districts, we take away the household composition test, but also we give a higher amount of the SCT. So that's now the third scenario here. So I'll give you a preview of the key results. So the third scenario clearly performs better than the second one. Of course, it's a higher amount, but also knowing how poor these vulnerable people are, it's very important that it is a higher amount to buffer their consumption. The second key takeaway is that it's actually particularly good at buffering the consumption losses at the very bottom of the distribution. That's very often the people we usually care most about, right? So, we are back to our blue bar. So the blue bar again is if we wouldn't reform the SCT, we are again looking at the consumption and how it changes from the poorest to the richest. And again, if there's no reform, it's the same bar basically as before. It affects most in the lowest part of the poorest people. Now the red dot is if we were in this perfect information, we know exactly who needs the help, whose consumption is suffering most. And you can see that also sits still in the negative, but it sits a bit higher above the blue bar. Now our second scenario was, let's exclude the household composition test. We don't have perfect information, but we can exclude the household composition test. That's your yellow dot. It sits actually quite close to the red dot, right? So it tells you that's actually pretty spot on already. But then look at the yellow square. The yellow square was our reform 3, where we actually double the amounts. And what you see here, the bottom decile, it even overcompensates. Now you can say, oh, that's giving too much. At the same time, these are the very poorest people, and already in the second decile, you see it's just at the 0. So it's just getting people more or less back to where they were before the shock hit. Now, the second set of key results that I wanted to share is on poverty. So, interestingly, our third scenario does pretty well compared to this perfect information world that we know we will never be able to replicate in practice. Also, scenario 3 reduces the poverty head count and the gap across the board, but also particularly for the rural population, which is, of course, also a key constituency here. Now, we do see an increase in coverage for female-headed households and also other vulnerable groups. Because remember, we took away the household composition test. We are not just only focusing by construction on females anymore. And while that means coverage for male-headed households goes up, it also still means we are also including more female-headed households, right? Because not all female-headed households were there in the first part. And there's still higher coverage for female-headed households than for male-headed households. So we're back to this chart, and again, we have our blue bars if we don't reform anything. And now here I only included the automatic response, so this perfect information world, which is the red squares, and the reform 3, which means we're excluding the household composition test. and we're actually giving double the amount to those in drought-affected regions. And you can see again, it actually is better than just purely an automatic response in terms of lifting people higher up. And you can see it works against rural and urban, but also it works across the female and the male-headed households. Now, of course, budget. We are here today also to talk about the budget. So what I'm showing here is kind of baseline overview. You can see that, of course, there's in any of these three scenarios a huge increase in recipients. And you can also see that, of course, in any of these scenarios, you need more money. Well, we kind of knew this, right? Now, you can see the numbers. Obviously, in this first scenario with this perfect information, you need to spend a lot of money because you're actually knowing everyone who needs to get one. Now, the second one comes in, of course, a lot cheaper. But the third one, actually, the additional expenditure is pretty close to what was now spent on the emergency drought benefit. Now, in a way, this is still quite specific simulations, but I think it gives you the gist of what are the parameters in the social protection policy that a policymaker needs to think about and how they can affect how you get to the people. So the main takeaways I wanted to share here is that they increase poverty droughts, of course, and particularly for the most vulnerable, they reduce the consumption. And while the SCT is already good at getting to the poorest and most vulnerable, it's limited in scope, and when a drought hits, it can't respond nimbly, right? So in our analysis, what we find is that removing the household composition criterion in such circumstances can be an important step to actually alleviate the pressure on those households particularly. I should also mention we do this only as a one-year exercise. This, in a way, means we are kind of underestimating, because we do know that households, if they are hit by a shock, their consumption will be affected the year after, and it might carry over, right? So in one way, it's also to say that this is kind of the one day after kind of simulation we're doing here. Now, it's also obviously financially a challenge and requires significant funding, so all the more important to make sure it's targeted well. Now let me close with this slide. So when I'm thinking about this, and as I was preparing for this talk, I was like, given all the policy debates you're having right now, and you're talking about potentially changing the targeting of the SCT and the routes, and how prevalent they have become, I was thinking, okay, you have like the big square here is kind of the population overall, the big rectangle. In the blue bubble, you have the permanent SCT beneficiaries. I call them permanent in terms of like if you have good times, right? So the ones you always want to deliver to. But then you have a drought coming in, and that's like the reddish bubble. And then you have these districts that are severely affected by the drought. And some of them will already be beneficiaries, so they like the part in the middle where the two bubbles overlap. And some of them are not. And is there a way to think of like a temporary beneficiary register, like a crisis time one, that you have lying in your cupboard in the ministries, and when it hits, and when you know this is the region, and this is the district, and this is the district that are concerned, can we pull it out? Can we double up the benefit there? And I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Round of applause for Pia. Thank you so much. She has left with a question. She has left us with a question. You know. Come again? No, I'm just saying that you've left us with a question. Do we have someone that would like to answer that? Any quick reaction to that? I know that it's not provided for in the book, but any quick reaction to this presentation and some of the things she's mentioned? Maybe one or two hands? Any quick reaction to that? Addition, comment? Yes?
Thank you. What's the poverty measure? And what category, what classification constitutes households in poverty and out of poverty that were included?
So we use the extreme poverty, like the usual definition that's also used by Samstats. And then we use that in all the same definition with the same poverty line for all the results we've shown here. Of course, you can always do variations, but we try to always stick to the benchmark in the country. But of course, because the shock is so large, it already pushes many more people into poverty as per our simulations.
Thank you so much. Yes, Mr. Jeff, just maybe 2 hands or so then.
Good morning, Pierre. My name is Jeff. I'm a journalist. First of all, I want to commend you for the analysis on the SCT and what you feel should be done. Perhaps one question that arises is the 400 allocated to households enough? If not, what should government do as a minimum? And also, I wanted to find out how broad was your analysis? There are, of course, areas which are more vulnerable than others. So could you just give us an overview of how your outreach was? Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, and thanks a lot for the questions. So, so as such, in terms of how broad the analysis was, we trialed a lot more different scenarios in terms of trying, for example, if the drought wouldn't be as bad, like more like a 2015 type of weather. And of course, that looks better because not as many households will suffer as much. Now, in terms of, is the 400 enough? It really depends on each household. And the government needs to come up with one specific value, right? And for some, it will mean they're already nearly there, so then it's making it a bit higher than for others that are really very poor. I would say overall, what we see, particularly if a shock comes in, it's very important, and the doubling up also was very important in that situation because it was so severe. Now, the exact amounts, I think that's also something that, again, where the budget discussion also comes in, because you need to make sure that ends meet in the end for the government as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response and just for those quick reactions to the presentation. And I know that even as we break for tea, we should be able to interact further. And I know that some questions can still, be directed to Pierre during the tea. At this point, we shall break for tea. Thereafter, we'll regroup for a group photo, which will be done just within this building. And when we get back, we'll have remarks from UNICEF, and also we'll have 2025 media budget reviews as turning livelihoods through financial headwinds. We'll have this presentation by Mr. Kalikeka from ZIPA, and it will take us to the launch of the report. At this point, I invite you for tea. I'll ask that the Executive Director interim from ZIPA leads the high table. Then the rest of us, there are 2 tables, 2 serving bays. Please feel free to use any. Thank you. There's also a serving by this side, ladies and gentlemen. Let's feel free to utilize it. Thank you. We may begin to take our seats for those that have finished. We may begin to take our seats. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I want to believe we enjoyed our tea. We'll move straight into the program, but like I indicated earlier, that we shall also take this opportunity to get into a group photo. And at this point, Madam Penelope, yeah, I can see her, she will lead us to where the group photo is being taken. I will request that the high table led by the interim ED from Zipa leads us outside. That's where the group photo will take place from. We can all be headed outside. Thank you. Penelope is just right there. She will lead us outside. Ladies and gentlemen, I request that we all proceed outside for a group photo. request that we can be seated for those that are still standing. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll make headways in our program. Like I said, immediately after tea, we're going to have remarks from UNICEF. Thereafter, we also have remarks from Mr. Mbewe Kalikeka, the ZIPA Head of Public Finance, and that will lead us to the launch of the report that has made us gather this morning. At this point, without further ado, allow me to welcome Mr. Tinkan Msonda, UNICEF representative, for remarks. Round of applause as he makes his way. I was told it's not Mr. Musonda, it's Msonda without a U.
How did you know that? Anyway, all right. I don't want to be the one standing between my speech and the launch of the report, which we're here for. So I will make my remarks quick, so not to bore you. The guest of honor, the director of ZIPA, UN colleagues that are in the room, senior government officials present, distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning once again. Good morning. Mwazuka bwanji. All right, okay, so it is a pleasure for us today as UNICEF. We extend our appreciation for the opportunity to participate and be associated with this important event. Let me begin by commending the government of the Republic of Zambia for the significant progress that has been made in stabilizing the economy and laying the foundation for inclusive growth. The 2025 mid-year budget analysis, as presented in the report, shows that Zambia's economic recovery is gaining momentum, which is really, really positive. Real GDP grew by 4.5% in the first quarter, supported by strong performance in agriculture, mining, and food services. And inflation, as you know, slowed to 14.1%, and the kwacha has appreciated by 17% year to date. These are encouraging signs. They reflect the government's commitment to macroeconomic stability and resilience. But as we celebrate these gains, we must also ask, how do we ensure that this recovery translates into real, tangible improvements in the lives of children and their families? You would agree with me that this is the challenge, but also the opportunity before us. Let me take a moment to, again, commend government's response to the recent drought. I think we saw the amazing analysis that has been done by our colleague from UN WIDA. The report shows that the social cash transfer program dispersed 5.5 billion kwacha to 1.3 million households, exceeding its target by 29.3%, and maintained the emergency transfer value of 400 per month. I know there was a question that probed to say, is this amount sufficient? But I think that's up for discussions. Again, we have to be mindful of the fiscal space also in terms of where the additional resources, if it has to be increased, come from. These are commendable efforts to safeguard livelihoods and protect the most vulnerable, especially children and women. Colleagues, this is why, as UNICEF, we're deeply invested in the budget monitoring and execution, because it is through these very budgets that policies are translated into services. And I was just mentioning to the ED that it is important that we have the Minister of Finance in the room, particularly the Department of, or the Budget Directorate. I think that's key to have as part of the conversation. So the budget translates policies into services, into classrooms, into clinics, nutrition programs, and safe water points. Budgets are not just financial instruments, they are also tools for protecting and empowering Zambia's children, the future of this nation. We are proud to continue playing this role as UNICEF, and we commend the Zambia Institute for Policy Analysis and Research for their rigorous and timely analysis. Their work helps us all better understand where progress is being made and where more attention is required. As I said, as UNICEF, we remain committed to working alongside the government and all partners to ensure that every kwacha spent delivers results for children. We will continue to support efforts to strengthen public finance for children, improve service delivery, and build resilience in communities. Let us use the highlights from today's analysis to advocate for smarter investments, stronger systems, but also inclusive policies that leave no child behind. As I promised, with these few remarks, guest of honor, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Another round of applause for Mr. Sonda. Thank you so much, sir, for making that very brief. We do appreciate those remarks, and I know that someone hinted to me that my questions are piling up. What time are we getting into question and answer? We shall be getting into that shortly. But first, we'll also have a presentation from Mr. Mbewe Kalikeka, who is ZIPA Head of Public Finance. A round of applause for him as he makes his way. We can do better, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Riding on the protocols observed, my name is Mbewe Kalikeka, as earlier introduced by the Director of Programs. And I'll run you through our 2025 mid-year budget review. But first also, I'd like to recognize my co-authors that we worked tirelessly with on developing this report. I think most of them are in the room, and just want to say thank you to the team, as well as also to say thank you to UNICEF that also provided technical guidance, financial support, as alluded to by the Executive Director, also recognizing our partners, UN UWIDA, who also on hand to provide us with technical and financial support. So, ladies and gentlemen, our report is titled Sustaining Livelihoods Through Financial Headwinds, and this is just 2025 mid-year budget review. So basically, this is just an outline of the report, of my presentation. So I'll start with just some brief macroeconomic aggregates, just look at some economic developments that have occurred during the first 2 quarters of 2025. Then we'll look at the fiscal performance for the first half of the year. Then we'll now dive into the social sector, so that's the health, education, then also look at the cash for work, water and sanitation. Then we'll now look at some of the outlook and risks for 2025, as well as some projections for 2026, then also some policy recommendations. Though this is just for the presentation, but the main report, of course, has got more sectors and it's got more details. So if we move to economic developments, I think the Executive Director, the Director from Ministry of Finance, I think both acknowledge that 2024 was quite a challenging year, mainly because, of course, we experienced the drought, and what we saw was growth was revised downwards. But then what we've seen is that 2025, the first quarter numbers are showing that the economy has actually picked up and grew to 4.5%. And if you look at what the 2024 numbers were for first quarter, the economy was at 2.2%. So of course now you can see that the economy has demonstrated some resilience, and I think we're heading for positive economic growth. And then if you try to dissect the numbers or look down into the numbers, see what are some of those drivers for growth. What we see, of course, is that agriculture, the agriculture sector, grew by 74.4%. And this, of course, is coming to the good rains that we experienced towards the end of the year, and I think during the first quarter of 2025. And of course, we recorded a bumper harvest, I think, of about 3.6 million metric tons of maize. Of course, we've seen also the mining sector. Mining output has grown. And I think, if I remember very well, the first quarter numbers show that mining output grew, I think, to 460,000 metric tons. And of course, ICT also grew by 16.2. So basically, that's some of the drivers of growth in the first quarter of 2025. Then come to appreciation of the kwacha and inflation. I'll skip these 2 points in this slide, and I'll talk about them in the next slide. Then the last one there is the debt restructuring, I think, which we've been talking about, I think, from around 2022. But what we picked out was about 94% of this debt has actually been restructured. Of course, improving the parameters or the metrics that are used to measure debt. So putting Zambia at least on a path of debt sustainability. So now moving to inflation and exchange rate. So what we did basically is we just tried to plot the numbers. So the red line is showing, so the red line there is just showing the inflation. Then the green line, my apologies, I think it's not very clear. The green line is a bit faint, but this is just actually showing kwacha versus the US dollar. So if you see around this point here, both actually start to dip. And if you look at some of the drivers of inflation, that's the food and non-food inflation. Because, of course, of the bumper harvest that we recorded, we reduced the pressure, of course, in terms of importing grain. Then also, if you look at the price of crude oil on the international market, this also actually declined. So because Zambia was importing heavily these two, fossil fuels, grain, we actually saw that the exchange rate around this period, that's why we saw that appreciation. But now, thanks to favorable crude oil prices, the bumper harvest, we actually saw that the exchange rate began to decline. And I think currently it's trading at 23 kwacha to a US dollar. So that also affected inflation. So now because food prices have reduced, we saw a dip in inflation. Fuel prices have also reduced, we saw also a dip in inflation. So basically you can see that these two variables or macroeconomic aggregates will actually have been moving together. Now, if we move to fiscal performance, so this is just broadly looking at the revenue and grants. For the first half of the year, what we saw is that Treasury managed to collect 89 billion kwacha, but this was 3% below the projected amount, or what was projected in the 2025 budget. Say by end June, they were supposed to collect this amount, but they only collected 89 billion, which was 3% below target. But of course, despite having the lower than projected target, we saw that, pardon me, this is a slide a bit small. We saw that the mining sector contributions to revenues was 4.3% above target, and this comes to what I earlier mentioned, the increase in mining output. Then what we also saw was that VAT was below target by 14.3%. And this basically is coming to the non-payment of arrears as companies faced cash flow constraints. Then if you look at the non-tax revenues, these were also 14.2% below the projected amount. And when we looked at the numbers, we tried to see what revenue lines in terms of under the non-tax revenue that led to this lower than projected collections. And what we saw was that SOEs, state-owned enterprises, continue to underperform. So there was a report that was done, World Bank in conjunction with Zipper, and one of the issues that we picked out was state-owned enterprises actually placed 113 million US dollars on the treasury in terms of capital injections. So if you look at that equation, the government puts in more money to support state-owned enterprises, but in terms of what they retain as dividends, it's quite low. And if you look at the treasury numbers, that's reflected under that 14.2% below target. Then obviously other revenue lines that also affected is the mineral royalty collections. As much as Zambia benefited from the appreciation of the kwacha, it's got basically an opposite effect when it comes to mineral royalty collections, because these mineral royalties are paid in dollars. So when the kwacha appreciates, less amount goes into the treasury. When the kwacha depreciates, more of the domestic currency goes into the treasury. So that mineral royalty collections was under by 9.9%. Then coming to foreign grants, we can see there's a minus 72%, 1 billion versus 3.8 billion. And if you look at grants, probably maybe 1 or 2, 3 issues where these grants are channeled to. So of course, one is to support our reserves, is direct budget support, I think also to improve the current account balance. But then we've seen a 72% underperformance in the first quarter of 2025. So some of the issues that we're saying is direct budget support. If we don't receive that money, it's going to affect some expenditure lines, might also jeopardize international reserves, as well as also affect the current account balance. So now moving to expenditures, what we saw is that for total expenditure, of course, excluding amortization or principal payments, was below by 5.2. And I think in the upcoming remarks by the executive director, I think he alluded to this, that we experienced some spending compression or some expenditure lines were not fully funded. But one sticky point is expenditure on interest payments was quite high. It was 5% above target. And this is alluded to the higher than planned payments on external interest payments, which were affected in the first quarter of the year, because at that point the kwacha was depreciating. So more money was leaving the country to meet that dollar liability. So that's why we've seen that 5% above our projected target for the first 2 quarters of the year. Then in terms of safeguarding the poor and the vulnerable, we saw that spending on the social cash transfer for the first half of the year was 29.3% above the projected amount of 4.3 billion. So we now move to some of the social sectors and just bring in some key highlights. So allocation in the 2025 budget to the health sector, it was projected at 21.5 billion. And then if you look at how the health sector's performed, I think at the time of writing this report, we had obtained some numbers from the Treasury, and what we saw was that 45.6% of the 21.5 billion was released. That's by May. So looking at 45.6%, and we're like in the, that's by May, we basically concluded to say, okay, by June, we expect at least either 50 or more than 50% would have been released. So basically that's showing that in terms of budget releases to the health sector, by the first half of the year, we can safely say that we were fairly on track. But then when you do a granular analysis of that 45.6 that was released, what we saw is that 56.3 of that money is consumed by the health sector wage bill. So more than half of what is released went to the wage bill. The non-wage bill expenditure is less than half. Then, just looking at some of the expenditure lines under the health sector, we saw that 2.5 billion was released towards purchase of medicines, which was fairly on track because I think the projected amount was just also around 2.5 billion. And I think this reverses some of the challenges that we faced in the previous years where expenditure on drugs and medicines was actually way below target. And then if you look at some of the progress that has been made in the health sector, we can see that Zambia, in terms of drug stock availability, we've now surpassed the 80% as prescribed there by the World Health Organization in terms of drug availability. But one of the risks that we saw in the health sector, or that we picked out from the health sector, is the recent withdrawal of US funding. And if you go to the Yellow Book, it actually shows how much was projected to come in from the US government to fund the health sector. And we saw that 817.5 million kwacha was projected under USAID to fund the health sector. But now the closure of USAID by the US government poses a risk on our health sector because 817 million is projected not to come during 2025. And then what we did was we just tried to map up the grants that are coming to the health sector from the US Treasury. And what it shows is that by 2025, we're projected to receive 1.1 billion from the US government to fund the health sector. But then we're saying from this 1.5 and the closure of 1.1 and the closure of USAID, we don't expect 817 to materialize in 2025. So this basically poses a serious threat in terms of funding the health sector. Then moving to the education sector, so 31.5 billion was allocated for 2025, and by May we saw that 54% of that amount was actually released. So that actually shows that by the first half of 2025, government had surpassed the releases towards the education sector. Then under the homegrown school feeding program, 77.8 was released. Then we tried to look at some of the progress that has been made under the health sector. We looked at, of course, in the report, there's quite a number of issues that we tackle, but for the sake of presentation, we see that the teacher recruitment at primary school was low, and it was at 28% against a target of 4,000 teachers to be recruited by mid-2025. But then under the secondary school teacher recruitment, it was the opposite. Teacher recruitment was standing at 88%. That's 2,640 against a target of 3,000. Then the homegrown school feeding program has been expanded to all the 116 districts. Then coming to the social cash transfer. So like I earlier mentioned, social cash transfer was 29.3 above the projected target, and 5.5 billion was spent. Then in terms of coverage, what we saw is that 1.3 million households have been reached in terms of coverage under the social cash transfer. Then like Pierre, I think, during our presentation, talked about the transfer value. So currently it's standing at 400 kwacha, but then we are saying that this is where it's below the poverty line of 517 kwacha. Then, of course, this over expenditure, this 29% over expenditure, this basically was coming from the emergency social cash transfer. That was to support some vulnerable households during the drought. Now, this emergency social cash transfer came to an end in June. So there are still questions there that I think we keep asking ourselves. So government has already mentioned to say those households that came, that were onboarded under the ECT, the Emergency Social Cash Transfer, have now been removed. So we keep asking ourselves to say, what happens now to those households? Have they actually transitioned, or have they actually come out of that poverty that they experienced during the drought? And also, of course, the transfer value has been maintained because there was a top-up of 200 and is now around 400. And of course, another question that we're asking ourselves is, has an assessment been done just to look at the effectiveness of the emergency social cash transfer? And I think, I don't know if community development is here, and my colleagues from UNIWIDA, those are some of the areas of interest to actually do an assessment to look at the effectiveness of some of these social protection programs. Then we now move, this basically is just showing spending on social cash transfer just from January to June, and then this just plots the first half of the year. So this is basically the 29.3 variance that I was referring to. This is also in the report. You can still refer this to in the report. Then we have now the Cash for Work, which was a drought response program. What we saw is that disbursements were 1.3%, which was 33% above target. My apologies for the colors. I didn't think they'll be that difficult to read. But the details are in the report. And what we saw is that in terms of some of the information that we collected through just some key informant interviews, we've seen that this Cash for Work has basically been supporting some of these vulnerable households at community level. I must say that as Zipper, we've started doing some work under the Cash for Work. There's some policy note that we are developing using the micro ZAMOD, which Pia presented some of the work that has been done. So we also modeled something for the Cash for Work just to see what effect it has on poverty and inequality, and we're still trying to explore ways on how we can do some more work under the Cash for Work. But despite, of course, the Cash for Work supporting some of these poor and vulnerable households, there's still some challenges that exist. Of course, there's some inconsistencies, of course, in budget execution, and then also weak local administration capacity, because this is handled at local government level. Then, colleagues, I think under the social sectors, we also looked at water and sanitation. So the allocation for 2025 was 2.3 billion, which was 15% higher than what was projected in 2024. But of course, that's a nominal increase. But of course, despite having that nominal increase of 15%, we see that just by May, only 4.2% of that 2.3 was actually released towards WASH. And if you would now looked at how do we actually gauge the performance of this sector. So we looked at the 8 NDP annual progress report. And what we saw is that the targets that have been put in the 8 NDP, that was just for 2024. At the end of 2024, only 45.5 of those targets were actually met. And this, of course, is reflected in these lower releases, 4.2% by mid-2025, by June 2025. So basically, we still have about 95% to be released in the first 6 months, in the last 6 months. So you can see, that's why you can see there is that underperformance even by looking at the sectors in the national development plans. And some of the key issues, of course, is the heavy reliance on donor funding, because most of the projects under WASH are towards capital projects. So because, of course, of the procurement hurdles, the lengthy procurement processes, we see obviously sometimes that's why we have those lower than planned budget releases. Of course, they need to lead to poor budget execution, and of course the missed infrastructure targets. So then, this is my second last slide, just to look at some of the outlook and risks. So of course, one of the issues that we brought out in the report is that as much as we are enjoying a kwacha appreciation, lower prices for crude oil, favorable commodity prices, most of these are not in control of the domestic economy. Any change, for instance, in the price of crude oil can push up inflation, can lead to a depreciation of the kwacha. Then, of course, it spirals out now to higher than planned debt service costs and the like. And then also we are saying the US exit, which is 817 million, poses a threat to budget execution, of course, to the health sector and generally to the entire budget. But what we've seen is that, of course, government has released a supplementary budget, 33.6 billion. That's to dismantle the fuel arrears, of course, continue debt service obligations. Like we've seen, 94% of the debt has been restructured. And then also part of that 33.6 is going to support agriculture, education, and social protection. Then medium-term growth, the economy is projected to grow on average by 6% over the medium term, and inflation is expected to decline to 7 to 9%. And of course, this has been revised by the government because I think for maybe past 5-6 years, we've been trying to reduce inflation to the 6.8% band, but now it's been slightly pushed upwards, 7 to 9%, because inflation has fairly remained elevated. Then the fiscal deficit is expected to narrow to 3% of GDP by 2028. So basically trying to move within the sustainable threshold of keeping your GDP, your fiscal deficit 3% or lower of GDP. Then, of course, we've seen the commitment to social protection. This is in the midterm budget plan, where I've seen 33.4 billion to the health sector, 33.4 to the education, 24.6 to health, and social protection is going to take 6.3. So, ladies and gentlemen, basically these are just some of the highlights of our report or our analysis. Well, we've seen, of course, the economy we've seen some positive growth, inflation, exchange rate have eased. Fiscal pressures are still there, revenues are still lower in terms of collections. Expenditures, of course, we've seen some expenditure lines being affected. And we also presented some key highlights within some of the selected social sectors for the presentation. So coming to some of the policy recommendations that we put out is, one is we need to strengthen domestic revenue mobilization. And this basically is coming to what has happened to say, what happens if, for instance, more donors keep pulling out? Zambia has to look within its resources to continue funding its budget. So that's why we're saying strengthen domestic revenue mobilization. And I think there's been a lot of conversations around this, looking at some of the tax exemptions, harmonizing, for instance, the corporate income tax rates and the like, taxing the informal sector. These are some of the avenues that we need to start exploring to strengthen domestic resource mobilization. Then, of course, protect and prioritize social spending. I can rely on Pia's presentation, where she showed the effectiveness of the social cash transfer. So we need to protect and prioritize these poor and vulnerable households. Then, of course, the last one is conclude the debt restructuring, because I think the longer you take in terms of concluding this, it's also got adverse effects in terms of offshore investors losing credibility and, some of those fiscal implications that it has on the budget and the broader economy. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
so much, sir, for that presentation. At this point, we'll definitely throw it to the public, for the audience, for questions, reactions to the presentations. Quite a number of things from that presentation. Quite shocking that 2.3 billion is allocated and only 4% is released. That's quite a shocker. But let's open it up. In case of questions, you can just maybe raise your hand and the mic will follow you. My colleagues from technical help me with one mic. Any quick reaction to the presentation? Any addition to the presentation? Might not be this, might be previous presentation by peer of other presentations. Thank you. I can see one, I can see 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. 10 hands already. So just indicate your name, the institution, and who you would want to respond to the question.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm Masao Sobanda. I work for the World Bank under education sector.
Sorry, sir, I've been guided that maybe you can stand for the sake of the cameras.
That's a very interesting one. It's either for the sake of the cameras or for the sake of my height. Okay, thank you so much. I was saying I'm Masao Sobanda. I work for the World Bank under education sector. So I've two questions, which I would like the last presenter to react to. The first one is on the recruitment. You highlighted on secondary teachers recruitment and primary teachers recruitment. I didn't hear you talk about the foundation of education, the early childhood teachers recruitment. I don't know if your report also picked that. What percent has been spent on recruiting the teachers at early childhood level? Then the second question is the withdrawal of funding. You highlighted something under health, the withdrawal of USAID funding. I'm assuming that that's the same situation for education. Does your report highlight the amount that has affected our budget as a result of USAID withdrawal? I know they were also supporting education. The third one is on analysis. You've talked about the releases, budget releases. Does your report also highlight the budget utilization? Because we hear most times that the releases are associated with utilization. When the beneficiaries don't utilize and they don't report, then it hinders further releases. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other question? You can see your hand. I had seen 10 hands. They've gone down. Okay, there's one there. This side, just raise your hands again. Just raise your hands so that he sees you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Jeff Mwamba. I'm coming from the University of Zambia, Business and Economics Association. So mine basically is on the social cash transfer. So the way I understand it is that the social cash transfer was put into play as a result of the extent in terms of vulnerability of the rural as well as some extent of poverty in urban setting. So you find that there has been an increase in the rise of poverty, but we have this policy, social cash transfer, that has been put up so as to curb these poverty levels. So right now as we stand, we are standing at a poverty level of 60.5,
that is to say 82% rural as well as 18% in urban areas. But I would want to find out what are some of the challenges in terms of administration that has been faced, because it doesn't seem to speak to the certain realities that are on the ground. You find that poverty is on the rise, but then we have social cash transfer to chip in order to reduce these poverty levels that we have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just repeat those statistics again. You said...
Okay, so we do have poverty standing at 60.5%. Then this speaks to 82% in rural areas as well as 18% in urban areas. Yeah.
Thank you so much. As we respond to that, also let's clarify on those statistics that have been given. Any other question? Comment? Yes, there's on that table. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Dorothy Kabanda, coming from the University of Zambia Business and Economics and Business Association, sorry, the outgoing vice chairperson in the research committee. I believe my question would be addressing the last speaker, Mr. Mbewe. I'd like to find out something regarding government spending. This is with regards to social cash transfers as well as in relation to the free education that was put up. So there are a lot of people that have been complaining because I have some relatives that I've heard complaining about the free education, to say it's not necessarily free, but because they still have to spend on certain things in their in schools. Like the schools still ask for some funds from the people. So I would like to find out what is the government spending on these schools? Like, does government give the schools any money on the spending, and what are the things that what are the measures that are used to follow up on these spendings? Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll allow responses to those, then we'll pick up other questions. Unless there are any other questions right now, okay, we'll allow the responses for these questions. He had corrected me that he's not Mr. Mbewe. Mbewe is the first name, is Mr. Karikeka. But we'll begin with you, sir, then we'll get to, I know there was a question also that was speaking to Pia's presentation, but we'll begin with, you can just bring the mic this side, yes.
Thanks. So I'll start with Mr. Masasobanda. I think there was 3 questions there. The first one is on the recruitments and early childhood. Yeah, so in the report, the number that I actually reported there for primary school actually does incorporate the recruitments under early childhood. Yes. So it's a lump sum figure, and that's how it's been reported under the Ministry of Education. Yes. Then in terms of the withdrawal funding, in our report, we didn't actually delve deep into the funding under the education sector. So basically what we just did was we looked at one sector, that's just the health sector, because we know that the USAID actually does fund quite a lot of programs on the budget, be under health, so quite a lot of programs. So basically that 817 million is basically just for the health sector, but then it's just basically giving us a direction in terms of the loss in terms of grants that we foresee. But it's something, of course, that we can do, and probably even other people within this room. I think if you just get, for instance, the yellow book and just go under the education sector, it does actually show you exactly how much, for instance, is going to come in from USAID. Then you'll be able to say, okay, if this is projected to come in, but with the closure of USAID, we expect that this amount won't come through. Then the last question was, it was something to do with budget utilization. What was the question again?
So my question was, I saw in the presentation you talked about budget releases, but did you capture data on budget utilization?
Oh, okay. So no, we didn't capture data on budget utilization, because this then you'd capture when the financial statements have been released. So we'll capture utilization in 2026 when the audited financial statements have been released. So for now, we're only able to capture releases, but in terms of utilization, it's a bit challenging, like to capture for the during the fiscal year. But once the financial statements have been audited and released, then we're able to capture utilization. But then that only happens in the following year. There was a question on SCT. I don't know, Pierre, if you want to come in on that one.
I start and I leave the difficult parts to you, okay? So I think I want to come back to your question, and it brings us a bit back also to the question of the adequacy of the benefit amount, right? But I think there's several things coming in here. So the first one is obviously implementation. It's very hard to implement such a benefit, and I will not speak here for the ministries who are present, who know way more about this than me. I'll rather speak in a more general manner, that it depends on the type of benefit, the type of targeting, et cetera, but it's also about processes, right? And it's actually really tough to reach the right people with the right benefits. So, but maybe someone else or maybe can enlighten on that. What I would say though, what we do see, and we do see it actually in many countries, you see how the poverty lines are periodically uprated based on the basket of goods one thinks is the minimum a household or a person should consume. Now, one of the reasons why it's also difficult is that usually the benefit amounts, they are stuck. They're in absolute levels, and they're not automatically uprated with inflation. When you then eventually uprate the basket that's used for the poverty line, that happens implicitly, right? So it was in the last retreat actually exactly one of the exercises that was done together with the colleagues from the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Community Development and Social Services, and others in the room, to try to understand how pegging a benefit amount to inflation could help. So that's something I want to add to this, because I think it's one way in on what you mentioned. So now, Mbebe, I'll leave you to the difficult parts.
Okay, no, I think it's been well captured. Do you want to come in, sir?
I think that you ask a very brilliant question, that how come we are seeing poverty rising when we have programs like social cash transfer, and it is the quantities and amounts that are being outlaid are getting larger. I think we have one huge problem in our economy. It is evaluation of programs. If you look at the data that we use to measure poverty, the frequency of the production of that data itself is not consistent. I think we had 2015, from 2015 you come to 2022. There are supposed to be 2 years in between the measurement points of poverty, so that you can quickly evaluate when you see a challenge of when you are intervening, and then the results are pointing in the opposite direction. Now, we had 2022 measurement. We should have measured again at 2024. But we haven't. So this creates challenges in evaluating most of these programs, and seeing how we can quickly adjust them to to realign with reality. Suffices, at ZIPA we have been doing what we call multidimensional poverty assessments, working together with the Ministry of Finance and UNDP, supporting with methodologies. So the results that we get from there, sometimes if you follow them, you will see that there are certain programs that show effectiveness, poverty programming that show effectiveness. But in terms of social cash transfer, it's very difficult to see because of the amounts and the focus areas of multidimensional poverty. But I think what I wanted to strike home is the fact that we need regular calibration of poverty so that we are able to check our programming and its effectiveness. I thought I should add that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edie, for that submission. There's one hand there, just behind you. There are two hands on that table. Let's take those. This is the last set of questions we're taking, so in case you have questions, this is the opportunity to maximize.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much to ZIPA once again for that premium content and the analysis. My name is Eddie. I'm from the Jesuit Center for Theological Reflection. I have a question for the Minister of Finance and National Planning. Whether the mid-year budget performance has been laid before Parliament, because we're yet to see the detailed contents, which I believed served as the primary source for this analysis. And we're building this on the provisions of the Planning and Budgeting Act, but also practice from the past 2 years, that this report went to Parliament and other stakeholders were able to provide that input. And then a direct question to Mbewe. I just wanted to find out the wash sector, the deprioritization of the wash sector in Zambia the past 3 years. Are there any underlying factors? You look at the APR you referred to for 2024, out of over 1 billion kwacha allocated, only 32 million kwacha released. Mid-year into 2025, we've only released 4.2% of everything what was allocated. We've got a big wash problem. We're coming from the biggest cholera outbreak. What are the factors that are contributing to this lack of prioritization for water, sanitation, and hygiene? Is it at Ministry of Finance level? I know you've referred to the financing mostly being external, but we do believe that the government does allocate resources in the national budget, even this year's budget, but then we arrive at the outturn. That commitment is not fulfilled. Thank you.
Very good morning, everyone. My name is Chama Mundia. I'm coming from Water Aid Zambia. Mine is a follow-up to what my colleague asked. And I think it would be good to hear from ZIPA what practical mechanisms we see in terms of improving the budget credibility and timely disbursement in the wash sector. And also just to hear from the team that if you had to prioritize maybe even just 2 or 3 immediate actions, what would those look like? Because from the analysis we have done, you would find that the budget execution has ranged around 37% for the last 15 years or so. And maybe lastly, I would also touch on the health sector. So part of the work that we have been doing has been around strengthening wash and healthcare facilities. In Mbewe's presentation, he touched on, for example, the WHO requirements, for example, on drug availability. We also have WHO requirements on wash in healthcare facilities. So just wanting to hear from the team, with the external health funding cuts that have come, how can we position wash in healthcare facilities as a cost-effective safeguard when it comes to health sector financing? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other hand? We take that as the last question. Thank you so much. We begin with the Ministry of Finance before we allow Mr. Bear to respond.
Good afternoon once again. If I did hear the question correctly, I think it was with regard to whether the mid-year budget has been considered by the Parliament. This has taken place. I think with coming on board of the Budget Officer of the National Assembly, you agree with me that the oversight role of the National Assembly has improved tremendously. And this year, as was last year, obviously at this point in time, the mid-year budget has been looked at. If you maybe also check the National Assembly, they have called a lot of witnesses to speak to the mid-year performance of the budget. And also we had a town hall meeting, which was held by the Minister of Finance to speak to the performance of the economy as a whole, and also in particular the performance of the budget at mid-year. Thank you.
Thank you so much for allowing.
Thanks, moderator, and thanks also for the questions and interventions. Edward and Chama basically asked questions around the wash sector, and I think some of the underlying factors. So I think, of course, government does provide, of course, a budget towards wash, but I think it still comes back to the issues around fiscal constraints, and then also I think the issue around prioritization, and I think it still comes into play. Because I think one of the issues that is there, like I even mentioned in the presentation, is that the wash sector is highly funded by donors, and it's good that Chama, who's coming from the wash sector, was also asking, but I was expecting that you are maybe getting the mic to respond to Edward on some of the challenges. But I think even there's still been conversations around also how sustainable are some of these tariffs, for instance, under these commercial utilities. The same way we also want to have cost-reflective tariffs under electricity. There's also been conversations to say, can we also have cost-reflective tariffs under these commercial utilities? I think for us to also have sustainable water and sanitation sector. Then again, Cham, I think you asked a question on the issue around pulling out this donor funding. I think it still comes back to the policy recommendations that we put there. They might be broad, but then the issue is that we still need to start looking within our domestic economy to start funding some of these sectors. ZIPA, our partners, UN-wide, there's been a lot of work that has been done on how to increase domestic resource mobilization. I'll refer to one of the papers that was done by Kwabna, who seated here, where he just did and just tried to look at the tax cap. How much is potentially supposed to be collected from taxes and how much is actually collected. And there was a tax cap, I think, of around more than 50%, which is actually not collected, but is supposed to be potentially collected. So all that money, if it's racked into the treasury, these are some of the issues that we can start probably doing away with. Lower funding towards the wash sector, probably also looking at other expenditure lines. So I think looking within our domestic economy, I think, becomes very key, because with the shifts in foreign policy, we've seen where US government today might just wake up and say, we are pulling out this funding. It's been happening the past 6-7 months. Yeah, so we need to start looking and say, how do we stand on our own as a country? And it's looking at the domestic economy. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Questions have been answered adequately? What I had?
What was the question? Okay, we can talk over lunch.
Okay, thank you so much. There's one more additional question or contribution. Yes.
All right. Hello? Yeah, you can hear me? Okay, thank you so much. Victor Katoma from University of Lusaka. I'm the Executive Dean, the Business School. My question relates to the gaps that we have spoken about in terms of data collection and also monitoring and evaluation. I think it comes in there. I've seen that there's low output in terms of research in universities. Universities are not very much involved in some of these research, processes. And as a result, what we get is mostly descriptive. So why don't we fund universities to help, do some of the research that you're actually involved? In other countries, like South Africa, many more countries, I think in Africa, they have research centers that are funded by government that actually helps to fill the gaps as far as research is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Would you like to respond to that? Oh, it's okay.
Yeah, I think that the Executive Dean is on point that universities have a critical role to play in terms of providing research or evidence that then can be used for policy analysis and advise government. And that's why for ZIPA, for instance, we have MOUs with several universities to try and bridge the gap where possible. But I think in terms of national statistics, the backstops on the Zambia Statistical Agency, which is the official collector of national statistics, or aggregator even of administrative statistics coming from the various ministries, so that it is utilizable for research. In terms of the specific research activities, yes, universities, think tanks, we can collaborate and do a lot more, but the official statistics like the Living Conditions Monitoring Survey, that gives you the baselines that you use to build models like the micro-ZAM mod. We can't allow it to be having periods of 7 years before you conduct another one. That is unacceptable. I think this should be high-frequency data. 2 years. You can take 10 years for an economic census, but for measurement of poverty, things change so quickly. So we need high-frequency data there. And of course, we have been relying on donors for funding this particular exercise. The World Bank has been supporting the ZAMstats, but for some reasons, the frequency has not been the way it should be. And I think we need to, as a nation, think, where else can we look? Is there an alternative that we can use? And I think, like I mentioned, the multidimensional poverty provides a cheaper alternative that we can maybe produce at regular intervals to provide some of the feedback that we need to churn out. Yeah, and I think that also responding to what the question that Chama had raised regarding the practical measures that we could use to finance WASH activities in the country. Mbewe was on the right trajectory, really, that if we are going to see a lot of change in this sector, we need to be able to relax some of the legislations that only limit provision of water services to water utilities. Private enterprises must be able to arise within this sector and provide this service to the communities where the utilities are not able to reach. PPPs must be an option that we should be considering. But for this to happen, we need to revise the structural rigidities in terms of pricing of the services. And of course, there's a question that if you put it to market rate, will the community afford it? But I think there are areas where the communities are able to afford. There are some residential areas, for instance, in Lusaka, the Meanwoods. They don't have, the people that are living there, each one of them is able to dig a borehole. Can they fail to pay a cost-reflective tariff for water? They are able to. So in such areas, why don't we allow PPP models to kick in and provide services so that the public financing can go to the areas where people may not be able to afford to pay the cost-reflective. This is the discrimination that we're talking about, positive discrimination for those that are not able to. They can be provided with public financing. Those that are able to pay, let them pay cost-reflective that is provided through models like PPPs. I think this must be considered going forward. And through you, Director, we hope that we can begin to champion this sort of thinking within the ministry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I know that conversations on this can go on and on, but knowing too well that some of these issues have been taken into consideration. I'm glad that the guest of honor is also noting some of these issues that you are raising. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, it reminds me back in the days when we used to watch those movies in the compounds. We used to pay 50 ngwe or 50 kwacha, I can't remember. They'll put posters, Dukes, Van Damme. When watching, one of the things we used to look forward to is what we call last fight. Last fight, the students I think can relate. Some here can't relate what's happening. Last fight. We're getting to that part of the meeting, the thing that has brought us here this morning, the launch of the report. And I will request that the following join us in front, while our colleagues from ZIPA will do the honors. I'll ask the interim director from ZIPA to lead the guest of honor to come to the front. Also, UNU wide as well to join, represented from UNICEF as well to join in front as we officially launch. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where we get excited. This is the most exciting part of this meeting. Yes, if you need to clap, this is the part we clap. We are officially launching the report, the projector. Yes. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if it was in church, I would say tunguru, tunguru, but since we're not in church, this officially, of course, will guide how this will be done. The official launch of the report will be seeing the cutting of the ribbon as well. Maybe let's count before this is done. We do a countdown from 5 to 1. Please just move closer. Just move a bit closer. Yes. The cameras are ready. This is in the studios. We say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Action. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ta-da! This is why you clap, ladies and gentlemen. That is the official launch of the report, talking about the media analytical report on budget performance and socio-economic outcomes for the first half of 2025. Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Yes. You'll pause for a photo. Yes. This is an exciting moment. Thank you so much. Awesome. Thank you so much. Another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, as they walk back to their seats. Penelope, I need her 1 minute. That marks the official launch, ladies and gentlemen. That is the code, ladies and gentlemen. You can access the report. Just scan that and you'll be able to have access to that report. Then we can delve into it. We can analyze it. We can unpack it. We can talk about it, analyze and interrogate, like we were told by the AD, interrogate these statistics and see whether they're also reflecting the lives of the many people out there. Our brothers in Mugubudu, our sisters in Chiturika village, can they also relate with what is happening here? We're told that some people don't understand graphs, but now can we translate also this to their understanding so that they appreciate exactly what and how the country is performing? Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, I will invite Ms. Malindi Msoni Chator, the Senior Research Fellow at ZIPA, for closing remarks. A round of applause for her as she makes her way.
Thank you so much. My task is really simple, just to close this wonderful event. I think after the highlight of the launch, I don't want to take so much time, and I know people are eager to have their lunch. So first and foremost, we just want to thank the Ministry of Finance, Assistant Director, thank you so much for taking the time. We appreciate your support, and of course, for funding our activities and our salaries. We don't take that for granted. Our partners, UNICEF, UNU WIDER, we are always grateful for not just your technical support, but also the financial support that allows us to carry out our activities. I think our director was very categorical in the beginning that we've become the go-to, for giving research-backed insights on budget performance. Whenever people hear ZIPA, they know there has to be some highlights on how we're doing with our national budget. We also want to thank our participants who've been with us with this work. It's nice to see some familiar faces in the room. Thank you so much for always supporting us. The media for being our voice out there beyond to carry our message forward. We are so thankful. And just want to say thank you, everyone. And this is how we close our event today. Please enjoy your lunch. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Another round of applause for her. Thank you so much. This, ladies and gentlemen, marks the official end of our launch, this part of the afternoon. I want to believe that everyone has received their coupon. In case you haven't, as you walk out, you'll be assisted accordingly. Lunch is being served at Jacaranda restaurant. There are about 12 people that notified me that they are fasting. So you need to return that coupon because you indicated that you are fasting. So how come you've collected the coupon? That was on a lighter note. I've been your moderator. My name is Paul Shingongo. Bon appetit.